bold claims of links in funding alleged terrorist groups, sanctions on his regime.
This weekend, the United Nations Security Council voted to impose sanctions on Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi's regime and his family.
Bombings and killings of his family, radicalization of his own people against him, pioneering for the so-called freedom of citizens, stripping of power to lead a country, branding him a dictator. All that was just a trailer for what they really wanted: the destruction of his body, soul, mind, and his revolutionary ideologies, which seemed to pose a great threat to them and their countries. Puppetry shows, and the only possible way to silence him was through the final boss: death. June 7, 1942, in Sirte, Libya. An infant was born. Raised in a Bedouin tent in the Libyan desert, hailing from a tribal family called the Akkadhofer. At the time of his upbringing, Libya was an Italian colony. After World War II, Libya was ceded to France and the United Kingdom, and both countries linked Libya administratively to their colonies in Algeria and Tunisia. However, the UK favored the emergence of a monarchy controlled by Saudi Arabia and endorsed by the United Nations, the Senussi dynasty, which ruled the country since its independence in 1951 under the monarchy of King Idris I, who kept Libya in total obscurantism while promoting British economic and military interests. When oil reserves were discovered in 1959, the exploitation of wealth did not translate into benefits for the people. During the monarchy, the nation was mired in backwardness in education, health, housing, social security, among others. During that post-independence period, the young man from Sirte, Muammar Gaddafi, already grown, was influenced by the Arab nationalist movement and admired Egyptian leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser. In 1961, Gaddafi entered the military college in the city of Benghazi. He also spent 4 months receiving military training in the United Kingdom. After graduating, Gaddafi steadily rose through the ranks of the military. As disaffection with King Idris grew, Gaddafi became involved with a movement of young officers to overthrow the king. A talented and charismatic man, Gaddafi rose to power in the group. On September 1, 1969, the Senussi dynasty led by King Idris was overthrown in a bloodless coup while he was abroad in Turkey for medical treatment. Gaddafi was named Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council, Libya's new ruling body. At age 27, he had become the ruler of Libya. Muammar Gaddafi's domestic popularity stemmed from his overthrow of the monarchy, his removal of both American and British air bases, which were the dominant foreign forces in Libyan territory. He also redistributed the country's land on a more equitable basis. Colonel Gaddafi had proclaimed true independence to his people. Oil became Gaddafi's major resource since he came to power as the head of the recently established Libyan Arab Republic. The victory of the revolution in 1969 signaled a paradigm change, leading the new government to fund population redistribution policies with oil revenue, creating a new framework for the nation's economic and social development. One of Gaddafi's immediate policies was to share the benefits and wealth to all Libyans. He nationalized some Western oil corporations, including British Petroleum, and establishing the National Oil Corporation, which embodied a more socialist paradigm. During Gaddafi's rule, large-scale social initiatives were introduced in the field of public works, free healthcare, education, cheap gas, newborn mothers' bursaries, and newlyweds bursaries, 0% interest rates, no foreign debt, and automobile subsidies. In fact, the nation had reserves equivalent to $150 billion, expenses associated with unemployment as well as subsidies for free power and staple goods. Affordable housing was considered a natural human right for every Libyan citizen. Homes in Libya were owned by individuals and families. Land was not supposed to be owned by others for renting. This was meant to combat homelessness in the country. Libya, which was among the poorest nations in Africa in 1969, saw a significant improvement in living circumstances because of these policies, and by 2011, it topped the Human Development Index on the continent. Indeed, Libya was rated as a high development nation in the Middle East and North Africa by the United Nations Development Programme. At the national level, Gaddafi was able to deal with two central dilemmas characteristic of Libyan society. On the one hand, the difficulty of exercising control over the tribes, and, on the other, the fragmentation of society into diverse and sometimes opposite tribal and regional groups. Gaddafi had the ability to hold together these territories with little connection to each other. It is estimated that there are about 140 tribes in the Libyan territory, each with different traditions and origins. At the international level, Pan-Arabism should be highlighted, with the confrontation open to the United States, due to the opposition that Gaddafi exerted on the influence of this country, reaching closer ties with other Arab countries, to carry out common policies of rejection of Washington's policies on the Middle East and Africa. The Libyan leader worked to strengthen ties with neighboring countries such as Egypt, Morocco, Syria, Tunisia, Chad, among others, as well as maintaining close relations with countries like France and Russia. Gaddafi also connected with Latin American countries such as Venezuela and Cuba, which led him to cultivate an extensive network of contacts and uncomfortable influence for Europe and the United States of America. In 1986, Libya was implicated in the fatal bombing at a West Berlin nightclub that left one American service member dead, prompting US President Ronald Reagan to dub the Libyan leader
this mad dog of the Middle East.
Reagan ordered the United States to bomb Libya and imposed economic sanctions against the North African country. 2 years later, Libya was implicated in the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103, which killed 270 people when it exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland. Years later, Gaddafi appeared to moderate and seek rapprochement with the West. In 1999, he turned over suspects in the Lockerbie bombing, and in 2003, the country agreed to eliminate weapons of mass destruction. Those moves paved the way for the lifting of economic sanctions, the restoration of diplomatic relations with Washington in 2006, and Libya's removal from the US list of state sponsors of terrorism the following year. In the years before the rebellion started, Gaddafi even hired a public relations firm to burnish his global image as a statesman and a reformer. Starting in 2006, Gaddafi spent about $3 million a year to execute a public relations strategy that included paying think tank analysts and former government officials to take a free trip to Libya for lectures, discussions, and personal meetings with Gaddafi. In 2009, Gaddafi became chairman of the African Union, aiming to turn the now 54-member organization into a group of African United States. He had been working to build his influence in the region for decades, building a gleaming mosque in Niger's capital, Niamey, in the 1970s, and another popular mosque in Bamako, the capital of neighboring Mali. Gaddafi also poured money into Chad and Burkina Faso as well. Gaddafi was trying to introduce a single common African currency linked to gold, the gold dinar. This move was greatly opposed by Western nations as this could have made Africa less dependent on external debt and aid. He addressed the UN General Assembly for the first and only time in 2009. In his 96-minute ramble, he denounced the UN Security Council as a terror council, suggested the H1N1 swine flu virus was a military tool, and called for renewed investigations into the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Critics called his plans for a united Africa impractical, and he lost his bid for a second term as African Union chairman in 2010. A year later, with almost 42 years in power, Gaddafi saw his regime begin to unravel. In February 2011, after anti-government demonstrations forced Presidents Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali and Hosni Mubarak from power in the neighboring countries of Tunisia and Egypt, anti-Gaddafi demonstrations broke out in the Libyan city of Benghazi. The protesters were calling for Gaddafi to step down from the presidency. Gaddafi vowed to crush the revolt and ordered a violent crackdown against the demonstrators. The government security forces responded by opening fire on the protesters. An initially peaceful protest movement transformed into a fully fledged armed uprising against his 42-year rule. On February 22nd, Gaddafi delivered a rambling defiance speech on state television. Gaddafi pledged to chase down the cockroaches and rats who had taken up arms against him. A brutal conflict began, with pro-Gaddafi forces indiscriminately shelling civilian areas, arresting thousands of protesters and others suspected of supporting the opposition, holding many in secret detention, and carrying out summary executions. Foreign government officials and international human rights groups condemned the regime's assault on the protesters. Gaddafi's violent tactics also alienated senior figures in the Libyan government. The Libyan Minister of Justice resigned in protest, and several senior Libyan diplomats either resigned or issued statements of support for the uprising. On April 30th, a NATO airstrike on Gaddafi's Bab al-Assasiyah compound in Tripoli killed Gaddafi's youngest son, Saif al-Arab, and 3 of Gaddafi's grandchildren. Gaddafi, reportedly in the targeted house at the time of the attack, escaped without injury. Following the airstrike, NATO denied that it had adopted a strategy of trying to kill Gaddafi. In August 2011, Gaddafi's hold on power appeared to break when rebel forces, with assistance from NATO military intervention and 8 months of intense conflict, had gained control of Tripoli and most areas of the city. Rebel fighters achieved a major symbolic victory on August 23rd, when they captured the Bab al-Assasiyah compound, Gaddafi's headquarters in Tripoli. Jubilant crowds ransacked the compound, destroying symbols of the Gaddafi regime. Gaddafi's whereabouts remained uncertain, although he released several audio messages urging the Libyan people to resist the rebels. As rebel forces solidified their hold on Tripoli, they intensified their efforts to track down Gaddafi, offering a $1.7 million reward for killing or capturing him. Gaddafi had suddenly vanished. But where was he? Muammar Gaddafi and his inner circle found themselves cornered and isolated in the coastal city of Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown. Moving between abandoned homes to avoid the fierce and indiscriminate shelling by anti-Gaddafi militia from Misrata, Benghazi, and elsewhere who surrounded the area, an increasingly desperate Gaddafi had decided to seek refuge in the Jera Valley. So, in the early hours of Thursday, Colonel Gaddafi, accompanied by key loyalists, decided to attempt a breakout from District 2 in a convoy of vehicles. Among those in the convoy were Colonel Gaddafi's son, Mutassim, and the head of the army, Abubakar Yunis Jaber. At around 8:30 local time, French aircraft operating as part of NATO mission attacked the convoy of 75 vehicles heading out of Sirte at high speed. The first strike destroyed one vehicle, causing the convoy to disperse into several groups. One of those groups, carrying Colonel Gaddafi, headed south and was hit again by a NATO strike, destroying 11 vehicles. Colonel Gaddafi and a handful of men managed to escape on foot and sought refuge in 2 large drainage pipes filled with rubbish. Rebel forces then closed in. Colonel Gaddafi was captured at noon. Amateur video footage showed the dazed and wounded Colonel Gaddafi gesticulating while being manhandled by the rebel fighters. The video footage further shows Gaddafi being dragged through the streets of Misrata. Still images from the analysis of the amateur video footage taken at the moment of his capture appear to show him being sodomized with a pole. A golden pistol taken from Colonel Gaddafi was brandished. 16:30 local time. Mahmoud Jibril, the National Transitional Council Prime Minister, confirmed the news.
قتل معمر القذافي.
According to Mr. Jibril, the colonel died a few minutes from hospital. Forensic reports concluded the colonel died from bullet wounds after the car he was in was caught in a crossfire. But a man, claiming to be an eyewitness, said otherwise. He saw Colonel Gaddafi being shot with a 9mm gun in the abdomen at around 12:30 local time.
Somebody shot him by gun 9mm.
Further amateur video footage also emerged of NTC fighters following an ambulance. The video includes scenes of soldiers celebrating with a man who they claim shot Gaddafi. Colonel Gaddafi's corpse was the most valued war trophy of all. After nearly 4 days of grisly and undignified display, the spectacle was over, the queues had gone, and now that infamous refrigerated meat container stood empty. The bodies of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, his son Mutassim Gaddafi and his army chief Abubakar Yunus Jab, lie buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the Libyan desert. This was chosen to avoid the risk of the graves becoming a shrine for supporters, or more likely being destroyed by vengeful opponents.
قاتلت في جبهة زندان وفي جبهة بن وليد ضد قدافي. Now كان في قدافي أنا في قاتل مع قدافي.
Over the years, Libyans have become fed up with the insecurity, weak governance, and corruption among powerful militias who control the capital, and feel a strong man may be able to bring some authority to the lawless nation. People do not feel safe and are constantly on the edge, since kidnapping for ransoms is a constant threat. The oil-rich country, a key departure for migrants traveling to Europe, once had one of the highest standards of living in Africa during Gaddafi's reign. All that went down with Gaddafi. The stability that led to Libya's prosperity has been shattered for years now, and the capital Tripoli is now the fighting ground of rival forces, as negotiations to build a post-Gaddafi Libya stall. Was the NATO intervention and rise of the anti-Gaddafi revolution worth it? Maybe not. Probably Gaddafi is rejoicing in his deserted grave, a grave penalty his people must endure because of their treachery. Or maybe, he is in grave distress for what his foolish people did, turn his beloved country into a city in ruins.